Imagine being in the first century. The air over Jerusalem is dry and bright, dust hanging in sunbeams that cut through narrow streets. Merchants call, sandals scrape limestone, and news travels on the wind. News that the teacher from Nazareth was executed, buried, and, according to some, seen alive again. In the weeks after his death, the city breathes in whispers, and in those whispers, a small community gathers. They are fishermen and tax collectors, widows and craftsmen, mothers with infants wrapped close, young men with calloused hands. They do not call themselves a new religion. Not yet. They are followers of the Way, disciples of Jesus, a rabbi who spoke of a kingdom that could not be toppled and a love that could not be killed. To understand what life was like for them, watch their days unfold. Morning breaks in the upper quarter. A woman named Mary, one of many Marys, grinds grain with steady rhythm. Her household wakes quietly. She has neighbors who shake their heads, who say she has been led astray. She does not argue. She bakes bread, because in the afternoon, others will come, stepping softly, knocking lightly. They will share this bread and speak of the teacher, and the room will fill with memory. Fear at first is their daily companion. After the crucifixion, the disciples huddled behind locked doors. They had reason to. Any association with Jesus draws suspicion. The authorities had moved swiftly once. They could move swiftly again, so the followers keep their gatherings small. A room above a shop, a courtyard behind a home, a place at the city's edge where the olive trees watch. They sit on woven mats, faces turned to whoever speaks, and when they pray, it is not performance. It is breath. Their world is not tidy, markets are loud, taxes are heavy, and Roman standards flutter at the Antonia fortress. The empire's presence is constant, soldiers at the gate, tributes collected, proclamations posted with firm authority. Yet this community hears another proclamation, one carried in stories of meals by the lake, of storms calmed with a word, of a cross and an empty tomb. These stories are not ornaments. They are fuel. At sunset, oil lamps glow like small suns. Someone begins to speak. An older man, with a fisher's posture, shoulders rounded by years of hauling nets. He talks about the lake, about a night when the teacher told them to cast the net on the other side and fish thrashed like silver lightning. He remembers the smell of smoke on the shore when they ate breakfast with the one they had seen die. Others nod, faces damp with the memory of surprise. They hear in his voice the roughness of rope and the softness of mercy. This is how their days turn, work and worship woven together. They do not own temples. They borrow rooms. They do not hold power. They practice presence. Mothers hush children with gentle hands as someone recites ancient psalms. A former tax collector reads the prophets with new eyes. A woman who once knew shame now smiles without flinching. They share what they have: bread, olives, stories, tears, coins. Gifts move from hand to hand like water, and no one goes hungry when generosity becomes habit. They are not naive. Some lose customers when rumors spread. Some are told not to return to the synagogue. A brother is dismissed from his trade guild. A sister's engagement is called off. These costs are not dramatic in the telling, but they are dramatic in life, and still they gather, because the center of their courage is not an argument, but a person they say is alive. On market day, the streets bloom with color, dyes in jars, figs stacked in pyramids, fish glistening on trays. A Roman centurion rides past, and the crowd rearranges itself. The followers of Jesus move with the crowd, but carry a different rhythm. They greet the poor by name. They choose honest scales. They notice a widower's thin cloak and press a coin into his palm without ceremony. No crier announces their deeds. Their love is quiet, and quiet love travels far. In the evenings, the retelling continues. Someone remembers a parable. A father on a hill, a son returning home with rehearsed lines and shame like a cloak, a party thrown for the unworthy. Another remembers a hillside where the teacher spoke of lilies that do not worry and birds that are not anxious. They are not dealing in abstractions. They are learning to live in a world where worth is not measured by standing, but by belovedness. The community grows. Friends bring friends. A cousin invites a neighbor. A mason who mended a wall for a believer stays for bread and lingers for prayer. A traveler from Cyrene arrives with news from the coast. He stays 3 days and leaves with different eyes. Growth brings beauty and complexity. Differences in language appear around the table. Aramaic, Greek, Latin. Differences in custom surface. Who sits where, what foods are acceptable, how to share fairly. They argue sometimes. They apologize often. They keep the table open. When a dispute arises about widows being overlooked in the daily distribution, they do not shrug. They appoint trustworthy servants to organize the giving, to ensure that no one is forgotten. Administration is not glamorous, but it is holy when it protects the vulnerable. They learn that mercy needs structure if it is to last. Some nights, the door is knocked with force, questions are asked, a name is demanded. The community receives these moments with steady eyes and quiet words. They have learned that trouble does not mean failure. In fact, the pressure clarifies what is precious. In the heat of interrogation, the truth distills. They believe that the teacher who was crucified is the Messiah, that his kingdom is already growing like seeds in soil, and that death, though still present, has lost the power to define them. Their worship is simple and dense. They bless the cup, they break the bread, they recall his words. Do this in remembrance. In remembrance does not mean in nostalgia. It means in participation. As the bread breaks, so their lives open. As the cup pours, so their time and money pour. They learn to forgive debts, literal and emotional. They reconcile quickly because bitterness is expensive and joy is worth too much to squander. News moves along roads like the wind moves over wheat. Along those roads, followers travel. Some by foot, some with donkeys, some in caravans for safety. They carry no banners. They carry testimonies. In Antioch, in Damascus, in the coastal towns where ships creak against harbors, they begin to speak about Jesus in marketplaces and workshops. Some listen with widened eyes. Some fold their arms. Some laugh. A few stay after and say, "Tell me more." And the table extends. The empire barely notices at first. Why would it? The world is full of gods and shrines. Another sect hardly disturbs the census. But this community is different. They refuse to treat any human like a disposable tool. They say, every person bears an image, the image of the one who made them. And this conviction leaks into behavior. They are difficult to exploit, difficult to buy, difficult to shame. This makes them hard to manage, and in time, the empire's patience thins. Meanwhile, their daily life continues. A craftsman named Eliab, who shapes wood into useful things, rises before dawn. He whispers a prayer while the coals brighten, not grand words, but grateful ones. He sells a stool to a woman who keeps a stall of spices. He mends a neighbor's door for free because the neighbor lost his job. That evening, he sits at a table with others and they share figs and fish and laughter that bubbles up after days of strain. This is not heroic. It is faithful, and faithfulness accumulates like rains, filling a cistern. They sing, not loudly enough to invite trouble, but not so softly that it feels like fear. Their songs are threads of scripture tied to the new melody of grace. Psalms made present. A child learns to hum the refrain while sweeping the threshold. An old man who once believed he had nothing left to contribute finds his voice, becoming a blessing. Peace to you. Words like seeds, seeds like forests in hiding. Gifts appear. Some teach with clarity, others serve with quiet excellence. A woman opens her home and becomes a shelter. A man with a head for numbers keeps the common purse honest. Another cares for the sick, washing wounds no one else wants to touch. In this community, status is unseated by service. The first are eager to be last. The greatest find joy in lifting the lowly. They do not always succeed, but they repent quickly and try again. Eventually, they must face loss. A beloved member is arrested and does not return. The community grieves openly. They cry. They sit on the floor. They do not pretend that hope erases pain. Instead, hope makes room for it. At the memorial meal, someone recalls the teacher weeping at a friend's tomb. Another says softly, "He wept, therefore we will not rush one another's sorrow." The table becomes an altar of tears and trust. Their view of time changes. They no longer imagine history as a wheel grinding people down. They imagine time as a road with a destination, a renewed world, a healed creation, a king who returns. This does not make them idle. It makes them urgent. If the king is coming, then every act of mercy is rehearsal. Every injustice named is preparation. Every reconciliation is a preview. They remain rooted in their place, even as their hope faces forward. They sweep their floors, plant their gardens, learn the names of neighbors' children. They adopt orphans. They honor marriage. They treat singleness as a vocation, not a defect. They learn to see work, whether in kitchens or shops or fields, as participation in creation's renewal. They are not waiting in corners. They are practicing the future in public. Letters begin to circulate, encouragements and instructions from leaders who travel and teach. The letters are read aloud, their phrases entering memory. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Carry one another's burdens. Rejoice with those who rejoice. Weep with those who weep. The letters do not flatten life. They deepen it. They help untangle misunderstandings and remind the community that freedom has a form, love. They face slander. Some accuse them of disloyalty to the emperor because they will not burn incense to his image. Some accuse them of superstition because they speak of a crucified king. Some misunderstand their table as secrecy for corruption. The community responds with patient clarity. They pay taxes. They pray for those in authority. They refuse to curse their accusers. Their resistance is stubborn and non-violent, and it confounds power used to obedience. The poor are not projects, they are family. The wealthy are not saviors, they are stewards. When a famine strikes in one region, communities in another region gather an offering and send it along roads carried by trusted travelers. This generosity is not a press release. It is a habit, and habits change the weather of a city. They take courage from the women among them, women who were first at the tomb and first to carry news. In homes, in courtyards, in gatherings where bread and scripture meet, women teach children the words of the teacher and instruct new believers in the way of forgiveness. They organize care. They correct errors with grace. They host tables where strangers become guests and guests become friends. Their witness is indispensable. There are disagreements the community must navigate over food laws, over traditions, over how Gentiles and Jews share the same table without erasing difference. They do not solve these with force. They gather, they listen, they test every idea by the note of love. Where necessary, they compromise on custom to keep the conscience of the weak from breaking. Where necessary, they stand firm on the confession that Jesus is Lord. Unity is not uniformity, it is fidelity to a shared center. Their ethics are startling. In a world where retaliation is normal, they bless enemies. In a world where unwanted infants are left exposed, they rescue them. In a world where impurity is feared, they touch lepers. In a world where sex is often power, they honor bodies as sacred spaces. Their holiness is not a fence, it is a garden. It is not a withdrawal, it is a way of tending life. Suffering does not make them special. It makes them like their teacher. They do not seek it. But when it finds them, they walk through it without surrendering kindness. A guard receives a cup of water from a prisoner. A magistrate meets a defendant who does not flatter or beg, but answers truthfully and prays for the court. Rumors spread. These people are strange. They are hard to hate. The table remains their center. On a cool evening, A loaf is placed before them. A child watches wide-eyed as the crust cracks under steady hands. The wine is poured. The words are spoken, not as magic, but as memory. Given for you. Poured out for you. In these phrases, the shape of their life appears. Given. Poured out. For you. The community receives the meal, and in receiving becomes a meal for the world. Stories from the road return with travelers. A woman in Joppa who makes garments for the poor. A jailer in a distant city whose home became a house of joy. A group in Antioch where people of many nations eat together without suspicion. The news confronts the old myth that change must be loud to be real. Much of the kingdom's growth sounds like footsteps and laughter and whispered prayers at dawn. Children grow up in this atmosphere. They watch adults confess when wrong and forgive without keeping score. They see their parents hold possessions lightly and people tightly. They memorize blessings the way others memorize prices. And when they are old enough to choose, they do not see faith as a set of rules, but as a way of being human that smells like bread and feels like home. There is danger still. A wave of persecution can crest without warning, and they learn to scatter like seeds in the wind. Scattering is not defeat, it is distribution. Wherever they land, tables form, lamps are lit, stories are told, prayers rise. A new city receives what an old city tried to silence. The empire does not understand how resilience can be so gentle. Some ask them, why not return to safe religion? Why not blend in? The community answers with lives, because love has taken on flesh, because forgiveness carries scars, because God has drawn near in a carpenter who welcomed children and criminals alike, because an empty tomb rattled their fear, because they have seen what happens when grace is allowed to become the organizing principle of a neighborhood. They celebrate feasts with renewed meaning. They mourn with hope that stares death in the face and does not blink. They discipline with tears. They restore with joy. And in all of it, they keep the center. Jesus, crucified, risen, reigning and returning. This confession does not fit in a slogan. It lives in 1,000 small scenes. A debt forgiven, a meal shared, a seat offered, a wound tended, a prayer whispered for arrival. The years pass, and the small community becomes many communities. They are not perfect. They are wounded sometimes by their own missteps, but their teacher remains their reference point, and his spirit animates their courage. They learn again and again that the way up is down, that the path to greatness runs through service, that the truest power is love enduring. Imagine the city again. Lamps guttering in the night breeze, streets finally quiet. In an upper room, a few remain after the others have gone. They stack dishes, they fold cloths, someone hums. A young man lingers at the doorway and asks the elder at the table, "Was it truly like this when he was with you?" The elder smiles, not with sentiment, but with recognition. He gestures to the breadcrumbs on the plate, to the empty cups, to the glow in the faces that left. "It is like this now," he says, "because he is with us still." That is what it was like to be a follower of Jesus after his death. Ordinary people, in ordinary places, practicing an extraordinary love. Their days were full of risk, yes, but fuller still of meaning. They did not conquer with force. They captivated with kindness. They did not encode their convictions into weapons. They poured them into welcome. They learned that hope does not erase sorrow. It bears it. They discovered that a crucified king redefines power, and a risen Lord redefines future. And the world, though slow to notice, began to change. In this way, the way spread, room to room, table to table, life to life, a quiet revolution with a beating heart, a people who decided that the truest thing about the universe had a name and a face and hands that broke bread and washed feet. In that conviction, They found courage for every loss, gentleness for every conflict, patience for every delay, and joy that could not be taxed. And under Rome's banners, under history's weight, under every pressure designed to press them flat, they became what they had always been called to be, a light that refuses to go out. Imagine being in the 1st century and then look around. Lamps still burn in windows, tables still welcome strangers, songs still rise in quiet rooms where ordinary people speak extraordinary hope. The story that began in dusty streets continues in every act of love that bears his name. And that is how the world was, how it is changed.